sulla struttura di questo film, che è più che, cioè non è soltanto la rievocazione naturalmente di un evento sportivo che ha segnato la storia dello sport e che insomma molti ricordano, anche i più giovani conoscono benissimo, ma sembra quasi un thriller psicologico, no? Cioè una sorta di indagine della psicologia umana e sull'uomo che c'è dietro la maschera, dietro l'icona.
Yeah, you said it. It's very true.
Ma come avete, cioè, perché questa scelta di raccontare tutto quello che non sappiamo sostanzialmente?
Well, I think, for me this film had to be more than a tennis movie. It had to be a movie about human behavior and human condition. When I was first presented with a script, a story about Björn Borg and John McEnroe, I wasn't particularly into tennis. It wasn't the tennis as such, or the historical event, or the celebration of the two men that carried my interest. It was a fundamental question of, why do some people have the ability to push themselves so hard that they become, world champions, that they're after this golden trophy of honor, of celebration and acceptance, or when does fame become the same as love, and what is the dream and probably also the illusion of that dream? What does that tell us about who we are and about our culture? So in that sense, the film was really taking a deep dive into existential questions of two men that, even though they were made out to be each other's perfect differences or opposites, they also shared this. You could also almost say like an existential void or existential pain, trying to understand who they were, why they were here, and just having some sense of gratitude in playing tennis, or feeling some sense of satisfaction in playing tennis, and some sense of need or sense of meaning in winning and being the best. And finding that story, I think it was also finding a portrait of masculinity as it was structured by two very different societies at a very different point in time. A Swedish society where everyone has to be equal in order to succeed and you can't stick out, and sort of an American capitalist society of the 70s where individualism is really the driving factor of your success. And pitting these two characters up against each other, the film becomes a look at identity and how you cling onto your identity, and how losing your identity, in Björn and John's case, by not winning at tennis becomes a very scary thing. So I think you're asking about the structure of the film. It's really taking these opposites and looking at them and then pitting them against each other and seeing what the similarities are. And through these similarities unfolding something that's maybe a universal truth or a universal condition about what it means to be a human being. And you could also say, the tennis is interesting in that aspect, because tennis is about, in many respects, about loneliness. You're on your own on the court, and the tennis court is demarked with these white lines where there's a sense of chaos and order, or inside the line and outside the line, and you have to adhere to a certain set of rules, and if you step outside those rules, you're in in different or in difficult territory. So I think for me there was just all these kind of aspects that you know, opened up, you could almost say, like a philosophical inquiry into human condition.
C'è una domanda lì?
Sì, buongiorno. Una cosa che mi ha colpito moltissimo è la ricostruzione della finale del 1980. Mi chiedevo quanto lavoro di previsualizzazione ha dovuto fare, quanti stuntman ha dovuto utilizzare e magari che ruolo ha avuto anche la computer grafica per realizzare una sequenza così importante. Mi pare che circa mezz'ora, 25 minuti.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing to have to execute a writer's sort of manuscript where the whole third act of the movie is a tennis match where no one says a word, and to try and make that dramatic. But to answer your question, I mean, first of all, Shia and Sverre did very intense prep for the film. They practiced every day for more than 6 months with professional tennis coaches, trying to learn, you know, how to look as good as they possibly could as Björn Borg and John McEnroe, appropriating their style of tennis play. So they learned this as a kind of a dance. You know, they're not actually playing tennis in the film, but they're dancing the moves. And then they had a body double each. So we could cut between the actors and the body doubles. And then we would reconstruct specific moments from the real match, partly because we wanted to authenticate the tennis, to make it, you know, what it was back then. We wanted to, you know, recreate those historical moments. Secondly, because it was a way to control the tennis. So we would know where they were on the court at specific times. They played to a sound cue, and then afterwards we could digitally insert the tennis balls. So there's a huge CGI job in place for that tennis match. Not only for the stadium, recreating the stadium, which is in many respects computer generated, the crowds, etc., but also the tennis balls. There's a lot of say computer generated tennis balls in that match, and that in itself was just a tremendous job made by a very, very great company in Sweden, and it was, you know, looking at these tennis balls, you know, frame by frame, finding out, well, does it fly right? Does it sit in the place on the court where it has to sit? Does it look natural? Does it need to be a little higher, a little lower, or a little longer? It was such a detailed job. And then we had a whole sound department, of course, working on top of that. What's interesting with image and sound is we can trick the eye to look at something that's very artificial, but actually feels extremely realistic if the sound is real. So the sound work of how a tennis ball sounds when it's shot, you know, whether it's a hard forehand, or if it's a volley, or if it's a lob or a smash, or and if it's played with a wooden racket of a certain kind. You know, Björn's strings he had a tougher stringed racket than McEnroe did, and how the ball sounds when it hits the grass. I mean, it was a whole big scientific exploration into this that then became this tennis match in the end. And then I have to say I was gifted with some of the greatest editors that I could ever dream of. I mean, very, very musically in tune editors that were able to create this dance and cut it as a you know, to me, a work of cinematic art. So that's pretty much how we shot the tennis. They had a body double each, Sverre and Shia. So there's 2 professional tennis players that make out some of the shots for them. Tennis players that have all been like in Davis Cup teams and played at a professional level. And they also obviously had to study exactly how Björn and John played at the time, because the tennis back then was very different to what it is now.
Pazienza, perché voi non vedete, ma dietro ci sono molte mazzate.
Sì. Buongiorno. Ci sono degli sport che sembrano prestarsi più di altri al racconto cinematografico. Il pugilato sembrerebbe essere il più adatto, infatti molti film sul pugilato. Il tennis, finora almeno, non è stato molto rappresentato sullo schermo. Questo ha costituito una preoccupazione per voi, cioè dover fare un film in cui sì, ci sono tanti altri aspetti, come lei ci ha detto, però il tennis, proprio il gioco del tennis è molto presente. E poi volevo chiederle anche come sono stati i rapporti con Borg e McEnroe. Immagino vi siate incontrati, abbiate parlato, ecco, che scambio c'è stato, grazie.
Well, I think the tennis was a concern for everybody, because as you rightly point out, it's never really been done before to a satisfying degree. But, you know, I think today, you know, we can create the most amazing action sequences, etc. So for me, it was just, you know, obvious that, of course, with the right kind of plan in place, that we could make a tennis movie that looked good. And whereas to me, you know, the film is about a human drama, but yes, it is very much about tennis as well. You rightly point that out, because tennis is a stage of how this human drama unfolds in the film. It's very much about loneliness, and tennis is a sport that's very much about loneliness. It's a sport that's about ultimately playing against yourself, playing against your own psyche, having to, over the course of 4 or 5 hours, you know, manifest this huge intensity in order to win, which then again takes a toll on you, and it eats you up from within. Yeah, it was challenging, and it was of course a scary challenge to undertake, but I think, you know, I had a very strong vision of how to do it, and it's something that we tested early on and found out, yes, this is going to work. You know, reconstructing actual moments of the match and then digitally inserting tennis balls using body doubles, etc. When we finally premiered the movie in Sweden, Björn Borg came to the premiere, and he said, yes, you know, the tennis looks convincing. And you know, Roger Federer came to the Swiss premiere, and he was very happy with the tennis as well. So of course there's you know, if you want to make a movie about the 2 best tennis players in the world in 1980, they better look like the 2 best tennis players in the world. It's true that you know, boxing has been such a great sport, you know, cinematic sport, because it's primal. It's about, you know, survival and honor and respect and fear and it's, you know, it's man against man, or, you know, person against person. You know, I guess there's not that many female boxing movies, but you could certainly make a movie about female tennis players as well as female boxers. Anyway, that's politics. But tennis has some of the same qualities. It's also man against man. And I think maybe the cinema technology has made it easier today to reconstruct things like that, because we have, you know, these tools of wizardry and cinematic magic that we can apply in a different way that was possible even 10-15 years ago. But I think one of the things that was inspiring here was, you know, in Forrest Gump you have Tom Hanks playing an incredible ping pong scene, and that was, you know, made digitally. So, you know, I came at it from that perspective. As regards to your second question, we've tried to reach out to both Björn and John from an early outset of the process, and it was very, very difficult to engage with them and get them involved. However, we had this amazing incident that when we went out with a casting brief for a child to play Björn Borg as a kid, we got approached by the Borg family, and by Leo Borg, Björn's own son, who wanted to come and audition for playing Björn Borg. And of course this made me extremely paranoid from the early outset, because I thought, oh no, now Björn Borg wants to control the movie. And but on the other hand, I thought, well, this could be a really beautiful thing, because he not only does he look like a spitting image of his dad, he's also one of the best tennis players in his age group in the world. And so we chose to go ahead and audition him, and he was just amazing, because the lived experience in this kid's eyes, and his knowledge of his dad, and the story that that's a lived experience in that family, I think just creates so much authenticity to the film and to this kid. And obviously, due to the fact that Leo was in the film, I had multiple opportunities to sit down with Björn and talk to him about his life. He never tried to control the movie or somehow have any kind of censorship about the film. I think he was very, very open and very brave in the process, because those of you who have seen the movie, you all realize that it's quite a dark movie at times about his character, and it goes to really dark places with him and with John as well. So I think it was very brave to go on this journey together with us, and he really likes the result, and he's very proud of the movie. John, unfortunately, we didn't have the same chance to talk to John about the film, and he's not been nearly as positive about the result as Björn has been. One other person that was very close to us in the production was Björn's ex-wife, Mariana Simonescu, who's also featured in the film. She gave a lot of input in the script process and in the prep. And she was a first-hand witness to all the events back then, and that was very interesting to talk to her. And I'd also like to say, when you... God, I talk a lot, don't I? You have to cut me off. You can't ask two questions at the same time. You have to stick to one. No, but when you go and make a film about the past, as we're doing here, you're really becoming a type of an archaeologist or historian. There's so many variations of that past. There's so many perspectives, and everyone has their own story. Björn has his story, John has his story, Mariana has her story, Bergerlin, if he'd still been alive, would have had his story. People around them have different stories. So you try to piece all these, piece all this puzzle together and make your own representation of what that was, and your own truth about what that was. And for me, at the same time, it's important to say it's a piece of cinema as well, and it's driving at something that the scriptwriter and myself and all the whole creative team wanted to render out as maybe a deeper universal truth underneath the story of Björn and John, or what's within that story of Björn and John, which to me was, the fact that, they were each other's opposites, but they shared some of the same pains and some of the same questions, and those are maybe universal types of questions that we as human beings ask ourselves, consciously or subconsciously. Why are we here? What's the purpose of it all? There's almost like this this dark kind of scream at the world in their tennis. You know, that they need to feel alive, they need to feel a sense of purpose, and they're finding it on a tennis court. That's where the movie rang home with me. That's where it rang true with me. Could just as well have been a movie about, you know, two artists, or two businessmen, or two drug addicts, or two soldiers, for that matter. It's the same kind of you know, longing that's at stake.
Gloria Satte, il Messaggero. I grandi rivali del tennis contemporaneo sono Federer e Nadal. Sarebbero interessanti come protagonisti di un film? La loro rivalità ha dei punti di contatto con la grande rivalità fra Borg e McEnroe? Grazie.
A lot of people have asked me this question, and I'm sorry to say that I don't know enough about Federer and Nadal's story to answer it. For me, you know, I've made my tennis movie. You know, I've dived into this world, and this is the document that I wanted to make. The real life characters, this might sound interesting, but they're not, or it might sound arrogant, but they're not interesting to me as such. I mean, what's interesting to me is what's behind that story and what it tells us all as human beings. And, you know, maybe there's a story between Federer and Nadal that's going to be told in the future. I think right now, I mean, the historical distance that we have to the late 70s and the 80s now is important to be able to kind of look at it with a little more of an analytical framework and say, what did it actually mean? What was it? What happened? Why was this a particularly interesting moment in time? I think there's something to be said about letting time pass in order to render, to look at the past and render some kind of truth from that past. So I hope that's enough of an answer to your question.
Adesso sì. No, una curiosità, visto che lei ha parlato molto di similitudini tra i due tennisti, una cosa che ho notato e volevo sapere se era vera, se fa parte del... che in realtà la rabbia di Borg da giovane è pari a quella di McEnroe da adulto, solo che lui riesce a un certo punto a controllare questa rabbia, mentre McEnroe invece la lascia in piena libertà. Volevo sapere se questo aspetto di Borg fa parte della sua biografia o se è una, diciamo, un'invenzione creativa del soggetto. Grazie.
No, it's very true to what Borg was as a child. It's historical facts that he got thrown out of his tennis club as a kid for bad behavior, for misconduct on the field, that he was not able to control his emotions until he taught himself and until the coaches around him taught him to use that anger in his tennis play by bottling it up. Now, I was actually very curious myself whether this aspect was exaggerated in the movie for dramatic purposes or not. So it's one of the things that I talked to Björn about, and I even showed him some of the raw material that we shot for those scenes, because I wanted to ask him, you know, was it really this bad? And he looked at this footage of his own son, Leo, and he was laughing and he was saying, yeah, that's exactly what it was like. That's exactly what it was when I was a kid. So that's one thing, that's one of the aspects in the movie that I've actually really double-checked with Björn himself. Now, he was a lot of other things, of course. He was also, you know, regarded, you know, as a joyful kid in many respects. But I think when I've spoken to people around Björn when he was a child, the one thing that comes out the most strongly was that he was a very, very sensitive kid, and that sometimes he would he would walk away from a situation and you would not know what you'd done to offend him. And I have a sensitive kid myself. I know that those types of feelings are very, very closely related to self-confidence, often, and to you know, a slight feeling of insecurity, and a slight, and maybe a feeling of being different. And I think that's the portrait of Björn that I found most interesting. It's, this kid is different from other kids. For whatever reason, I mean, it's not clear to me, you know, he doesn't have a bad childhood. I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure in the McEnroe home, which is, you know, it's quite easy to understand how McEnroe became McEnroe if you look at his family structure. I think with Björn, it's a deeper kind of, you know, an existential sensitivity or something, and I personally, it's something that I can relate to that. You know, I think it's true to a lot of artists. You know, this kind of, you know, why are some people a little more have a little more thin skin than others? And I think Björn was that, and then he had to build this armor around himself, and his coaches helped doing that, and it became a very powerful and also a very dark and dangerous tool. There's almost like a Faustian pact in that, to know that, you know, you have to look right into the, almost, you know, with the risk of being a little high-strung here, almost, you know, you have to look into the eyes of death, and into the eyes of, you know, existential void, to create this kind of intensity, to keep it at bay. And I think that's why he was so good, and that's also why he couldn't function as a tennis player past the age of 25, because it ate him up from inside. It was a very dark and dangerous game that he was playing. I just want to add one more thing to this. Another aspect that I actually double-checked with Björn was this kind of compulsory behavior. You know, that everything had to be routined and in schedule, and he said that was very true. He couldn't sit in a restaurant and the fork would be askew at the plate and you'd correct it. So I think that kind of you know, almost compulsory behavior or neurotic behavior was also developed as a consequence of, you know, bottling up your emotion, living a completely disciplined and regimented life, and having to do the same thing every day to be order to trust in yourself that you could go onto that tennis court and win. I think it's very common in sports. Obviously, we all know it from, you know, football players that have to put on their socks 2 times, or it's very common with actors as well, that they have little rituals. I think with Björn, this developed into extremes. And it's funny, when I spoke to Roger Federer in Zurich at the Swiss Premier, he said, I had these kind of things too. I was also a very emotional kid who had a very hard time controlling my temper, and funnily enough, he got a Swedish coach, and now he's like Björn Borg. So go figure. I think McEnroe is a different type of man. He's grown up in a different type of environment. It's very interesting how he, as one of the very few people in the world of sports, is able to use his anger constructively to become a better player, by letting it all out, by screaming and shouting, by stirring up emotion. He's almost like a method actor, you know, who comes on set and starts having a fight with the producer or the gaffer or even the director, you know, in order to create a sense of intensity, and then going in and giving blood and spilling it all out. That's McEnroe's persona.
Dobbiamo fermarci qui. We have to stop here.
I'm sorry.
Grazie.